And with me this morning is Commissioner Jeffrey A. Hughes. I now call for hearing in docket numbers W-1146 sub 13 and W-1328 sub 10 in the matter of application by Redbird Utility Operating Company, LLC, and Total Environmental Solutions, Inc., for authority to transfer the Lake Royal subdivision, water and wastewater utility systems, and public utility franchise in Franklin and Nash Counties, North Carolina, and for approval of rates. Before we proceed, and as required by the State Government Ethics Act, I remind the members of the Commission of our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and inquire at this time as to whether any commissioner has any known conflict of interest with respect to this docket. Let the record reflect that I have no such conflict and my fellow commissioner has no such conflict either. On June 7, 2021, Redbird Utility Operating Company, LLC, which I will refer to going forward as Redbird, and Total Environmental Solutions, Inc., which I will refer to going forward as TESI, filed with the Commission an application for transfer of public utility franchise and for approval of rates, and I will refer to that application going forward as the application. Seeking authority to transfer the water and wastewater utility systems and public utility franchise serving the Lake Royal subdivision, which I will refer to going forward as Lake Royal, in Franklin and Nash Counties, North Carolina, from TESI to Redbird, and for approval of rates. Redbird filed with the Commission supplemental and additional materials in support of the application on June 8 and August 6, 2021, on January 24, August 2nd, and September 8, 2022, and on August 18, 2023. On July 11, 2023, the Commission issued an order scheduling hearings, establishing discovery guidelines, and requiring customer public notice, which I will refer to going forward as the scheduling order. The scheduling order scheduled a public witness hearing to be held at the Franklin County Courthouse on September 25, 2023, as well as an expert witness hearing to begin on Monday, October 3rd, 2023 at 2 o'clock in this location. On July 26, 2023, Redbird filed a certificate of service certifying that the notice to customers of the hearing was mailed or hand-delivered to all affected customers. On July 31, 2023, pursuant to the requirements of Section 1B of North Carolina General Statute, Section 62-111, the Commission issued a notice of complete application. On August 30, 2023, Redbird filed the confidential direct testimony of Josiah Cox, president of Redbird CSWR LLC, that I'll refer to going forward as CSWR, and Central States Water Resources, Inc., consisting of 37 pages, and redacted direct testimony consisting of 37 pages and 4 exhibits. On September 11, 2023, a petition to intervene was filed on behalf of the Lake Royal Property Owners Association. The petition was accompanied by a request to hold the public witness hearing, along with 67 customer emails regarding the transfer of the utility. On September 12, 2023, the Commission granted the Lake Royal Property Owners Association's petition to intervene. The intervention and participation of the public staff in this proceeding is recognized pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Section 62-15D, and Commission Rule R1-19E. On September 19, 2023, the public staff filed the direct testimony of John Hinton, Director of the Public Staff's Economic Research Division, consisting of 5 pages, 1 appendix, and 1 exhibit. The confidential and redacted direct testimony of Evan Hauser, Public Staff Engineer, consisting of 34 pages and 1 appendix. And the confidential and redacted direct testimony and exhibits of Lynn Fiesel, Regulatory Supervisor of the Water, Sewer, and Telephones Section, each consisting of 8 pages, 1 appendix, and 3 exhibits. On September 25, 2023, the Commission held a public witness hearing in Lewisburg, North Carolina. On September 26, 2023, the public staff filed the corrected, confidential, and direct testimony of Public Staff Witness Hauser, consisting of 34 pages, 1 appendix, and 3 exhibits. On October 3, 2023, Redbird filed the rebuttal testimony of Todd Thomas, Senior Vice President of CSWR, consisting of 28 pages and 3 exhibits, and the confidential and redacted rebuttal testimony of Caitlin O'Reilly, Regulatory Accounting Manager at CSWR, consisting of 6 pages. On October 9, 2023, Redbird and Tessie filed verified reports on public hearing testimony. On October 12, 2023, Redbird filed a motion for substitution of witness and adoption of testimony. On October 13, 2023, the public staff filed its objection to Redbird's motion for substitution of witness and adoption of testimony. On October 13, 2023, the Commission issued an order delaying the start of the hearing to today, Tuesday, October 24, 2023, at 11:00 a.m. On October 20, 2023, Redbird filed its motion for substitution of witness and adoption of testimony for rescheduling of expert public witness hearing and to excuse 1 witness. In the motion, Redbird moved to allow Redbird witness Cox to adopt the pre-filed rebuttal testimony and exhibits of Redbird witness Thomas and requested that the expert witness hearing be delayed from 11:00 a.m. on Tuesday, October 23, 2023 to 12:00 p.m. on October 23, 2023. On October 23, 2023, the Commission issued an order granting motion for substitution of witness and adoption of testimony, rescheduling hearing, and excusing 1 witness. In the order, the Commission delayed the expert witness hearing on October 24, 2023 by 1 hour to begin at 12:00 p.m., allowed Redbird witness Cox to adopt Redbird witness Thomas's rebuttal testimony and substitute for him as a witness, and excused Redbird rebuttal witness O'Reilly from appearing at the hearing. On October 23, 2023, Redbird and the public staff filed a settlement agreement and stipulation. On October 23, 2023, Redbird filed the supplemental testimony of Redbird witness Cox. On October 23, 2023, the public staff filed the joint settlement testimony of witnesses Fiesel and Hauser. Additional consumer statements of position have been filed in the docket. So with that lengthy history, it brings us to the hearing today. I now call for counsel for the parties to announce their appearances for the record, beginning with Redbird.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Dan Higgins with Burns, Day and President here in Raleigh, appearing on behalf of Redbird.
Good morning, Mr. Higgins.
Mayor, Police Commission, my name is Edward Finley, Raleigh, North Carolina, appearing on behalf of the seller, Tessie.
Good morning, Mr. Finley.
David Drews, appearing on behalf of the Lake Royale Property Owners Association.
Good morning, Mr. Drews.
Megan Yost with the public staff, appearing on behalf of the using and consuming public.
And good morning to you, Ms. Yost. And before we begin with the hearing, are there any preliminary matters that need to be addressed by any of the parties? Okay.
Not aware of any.
Okay, seeing that there are no preliminary matters to be addressed, we will proceed with the hearing, and we will begin with the company. Mr. Higgins.
Thank you. Commissioner Kimmerite, Redbird calls Josiah Cox to the stand.
Good morning, Mr. Cox.
Good morning.
Do you prefer to be sworn or affirmed?
Sworn's fine.
Okay, so please place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. And do solemnly swear that the testimony that you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Don't think I've done that one before.
Good morning, Mr. Cox. Would you please state your name and your business address for the record?
My name is Josiah Cox, and my business address is 1650. I'm Josiah Cox, the president of Redbird Utility Operating Company, 1650 DePere Road, Suite 303, St. Louis, Missouri, 63131.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Cox, did you cause to be prepared and filed on August 30 direct testimony consisting of 37 pages of written questions and answers and 4 exhibits.
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your direct testimony?
I do.
Please tell us what those are.
On page 3 of my direct testimony, on line 10.
Okay, give folks a minute to get there.
Absolutely.
All right, sir.
At the end of line 10, it should read, and I operated the system managing the functioning, testing, and maintenance of that system.
Strike the word still.
Still correct. And then the second correction is on line 11 at the end, instead of, it should strike the word also, and act should be changed to acted in the past tense. And the third correction is on line 12, about middle of the line there. It should say you strike oversee and should say oversaw, all in the past tense.
Mr. Cox, subject to those changes, if I asked you the questions that are set forth in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same as those set forth in that testimony?
Yes.
Right. At this time, Commissioner Kimwright, I'd move the admission of Mr. Cox's pre-filed testimony, which also includes 4 exhibits.
Mr. Higgins, the direct testimony of Redbird witness Cox filed on August 30, 2023, consisting of 37 pages and 4 exhibits. And I believe some of the testimony is confidential. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Shall be, so the confidential and corrected testimony shall be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand. And the 4 exhibits, some of which are marked confidential, attached to Mr. Cox's direct testimony will be marked for identification purposes as pre-filed.
Thank you. Mr. Cox, did Mr. Todd Thomas, who's a senior vice president at CSWR, caused to be prepared and filed rebuttal testimony consisting of 28 pages and 3 exhibits?
He did.
Have you reviewed that testimony? Are you familiar with it?
I have, and I am.
Are you prepared to adopt that testimony and answer questions relating to it?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to Mr. Thomas's testimony?
No.
If I asked you the questions that are set forth in Mr. Thomas's pre-filed rebuttal testimony, would your answers be the same as those set forth in that testimony?
Yes.
Commissioner Kimmerite, at this time, I'd move the admission of Mr. Todd Thomas's pre-filed rebuttal testimony and the 3 exhibits attached to that testimony.
Okay. Seeing no objection, the rebuttal testimony of Redbird witness Todd that has been adopted by Redbird witness Cox, filed on October 3, 2023, consisting of 28 pages, will be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand. And the 3 exhibits attached to the rebuttal testimony will be marked for identification purposes as pre-filed.
Mr. Cox, did you cause to be prepared and filed on October 23rd supplemental testimony relating to the settlement agreement with the public staff consisting of 5 pages and 1 exhibit?
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to that testimony?
No.
If I was to ask you the questions that are set forth in that pre-filed supplemental testimony, would your answers be the same as those appearing in the pre-filed supplemental testimony?
Yes.
Commissioner Kimmerite, at this time, I move the admission of Mr. Cox's pre-filed supplemental testimony and the 1 exhibit attached to it.
Okay. Seeing no objection, the supplemental testimony of Redbird witness Cox, filed on October 23, 2023, consisting of 5 pages, will be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand. The 1 exhibit attached to Mr. Cox's supplemental testimony will be marked for identification purposes as pre-filed.
Thank you. With that, and pursuant to the filed settlement agreement and stipulation, Mr. Cox is available for a cross by Tessie and the Property Owners Association.
No questions.
Okay, no questions from Tessie's counsel. Mr. Drews?
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Cox.
Good afternoon.
You're aware that improvements are needed in the water and sewer infrastructure serving the Lake Royale community?
Absolutely.
Okay, you heard that from the customers at the public hearing. Is that right?
I did, and the written comments I saw the customers wrote in as well.
Thank you. Did Redbird retain an engineering consultant to do a preliminary assessment of what improvements would be needed?
We did.
Okay. Will you be doing further assessments to get a full idea of what improvements are needed?
Yes, we will. And we'll additionally, we're aware of a number of leaking lines that have been unaddressed, and we'll look for if there's more line breaks or leaks that need addressed as well.
Great. What's your timetable for completing a full assessment of the improvements that are needed?
It'll typically take about 3 months of operating the system longer to make sure that we have great data on it over the last number of months to make sure we know exactly what the improvements should be. But I would say 3 more months of operations.
Okay. And once you've completed that assessment, will that information be made available to the Property Owners Association?
I mean, if you would like us to talk about the improvements we plan on making, we have no problem doing that.
Great. I think they would very much appreciate that. So thank you.
Yep, that's something we've done a number of property owner associations across the country. That's not a problem.
Did you hear customer concerns at the public hearing about Tessie's failure to repair some of the community roads that were damaged by water leaks and by the efforts of Tessie to repair those leaks?
I did.
Okay. Is Redbird willing to commit to doing everything it can to avoid road damage caused by the water system in the future?
Yes.
And if some damage is unavoidable, will Redbird commit to making prompt repairs to the roads?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if you recall, Grace Noonan is the manager for the Property Owners Association, testified at the public hearing saying the POA had invoiced Tessie for $16,000 for road repairs that the Property Owners Association had made for damage caused by the water utility. Do you recall that at all?
I do not recall that.
Okay. In your opinion, would it be reasonable for Tessie to be required to either repair the road damage that still exists or provide funding for a contractor to do the repairs of the damage to the roads caused by Tessie's water system?
Yeah. I'm not Tessie. I don't have an answer for that.
Would it be fair or reasonable to ask Tessie to reimburse the Property Owners Association for the $16,000 they expended to repair damage caused by Tessie?
Again, I'm not Tessie. I don't have an answer for that.
If the transfer is approved without Tessie making those repairs for the damage caused by its water system, does Redbird plan to make the repairs to the roads?
We agree that any future repairs that are done, that we will bring the road back to the condition that it was at or better for every repair we do going forward.
But that would not cover the road damage that was done in the past by Tessie. Do I understand that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay. So that would simply leave the problem caused by the current owner for the property owners to take care of?
I'm just not aware of this problem at all.
Okay. If it is a problem, then you would be leaving that for the property owners to take care of?
I'd have to see what the problem is.
There was some customer concern that not everyone had been notices about the water system from Tessie. And the POA wants to know if Redbird will compile a list of emails and mailing addresses for all customers who are receiving bills and ensure that they all get timely notices.
We would love that.
Thank you. And will Redbird provide advance notice when there's work on the water system that may cause discolored water or other, or low pressure or other effects?
I mean, obviously, that's very situationally dependent. You know, where possible, we have planned repairs or, you know, planned events. We strive very hard to do advance notice of those events, but obviously with a system like this, that's almost fully depreciated with aging infrastructure and failing infrastructure we're all aware of, some of these repairs are going to be emergency and will be just all about service restoration. So obviously we can't give advance notice for those things.
Even in a short-term emergency, could you provide the POA contact person an email notification so they can send out an email blast to customers?
We would love that. And we always go on campaigns to try and get as much contact information as we can from customers. We'd rather be proactive in those. It's obviously text and email is easier than written, obviously, or signs.
Yes. Will Redbird commit to reading the customers' meters every month so they will receive the charge for actual usage instead of some estimated usage?
I believe if that's in the tariff, yes.
Okay, thank you. Doesn't always happen, but so I'm glad to hear your commitment to that. So Redbird filed an amended application on August 18th in this docket. Page 4 of that, and I can show you if you want, but it says the average usage for water is unknown. Do you know if Tessie maintained billing records that included the meter readings?
I'm unaware of that sitting here today.
Okay. So there's also a customer notice that went out in connection with this docket, and it set the average usage for residential customers on water as 2,300 gallons per month. Do you know where that number came from?
I believe that came from long-term estimated readings of those meters is what I believe it came from.
Okay, and so that was Tessie records?
I believe so.
Okay. Do you know why the application said unknown and then the customer notice had a number?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Now, 2,300, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I would add if it's a ton of estimated use and we know there's a ton of leakage in the system, it's very hard to determine what individual use is for customers.
Okay. So it's not compiled from each customer's meter, but more a master meter information?
That's all we have is the purchased water compared to, since the meter's not being read and some are not functional.
Understood. So 2,300 gallons a month seems, in my limited experience, somewhat lower than typical for residential usage. Do you know if that reflects usage for year-round customers or seasonal customers or what?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. The customer notice in this case also indicated that the average or the bill for 2,300 gallons of use under current rates is about $42.88. Do you recall that?
That sounds correct.
Okay. So the notice also indicated a projection that the bill for 2,300 gallons of residential use could be $73.44 after 3 years. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. Does that projected increase, and we understand it could be more, it could be less, does that include the cost of all the needed capital improvements to the water system, or just those that have been identified in the preliminary assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a couple things. One, we don't believe that accurately reflects what future rates are going to be because we typically consolidate rates and we don't know if we'll be back here for a rate increase in 3 years. So it really depends on how much work has been done, how many systems we've acquired in the state. So that is not, those initial notices were, required by the public council here, not something that we think the final rates will be. So I just want to say that.
So a factor in that projection, which may or may not happen, a factor is that that would involve uniform rates, so it would include cost of other systems too?
No,
Okay.
that was a standalone. So that's why I
Yes,
believe it's
standalone.
inflated. Correct.
Thank you. Okay. So on that standalone, does that include the cost of water system improvements from the preliminary engineering report?
It does.
Okay. And, you know, on the standalone, if it went from 4288 to 7344, that would be about a 71% increase. Is that
Again,
math sound correct?
again, that's not the way we believe the rates will go in the future.
Okay. In rate making, are you familiar with the concept of rate shock, where utility customers are subjected to a sudden large rate increase?
I've heard the term.
Okay. Are you also familiar with the concept of gradualism in rate increases?
I've heard the term.
Okay. What do you think of that term?
It's a regular regulatory term.
Okay. Is it reasonable?
It can be.
Okay. So you heard all the customer concerns about leaking water lines.
I did.
Is there a possibility the distribution system will be in such bad shape it'll need to be entirely or largely replaced?
No, because you don't have enough loss from the master meter to say that it needs, you know, now eventually, obviously, all the lines will need replaced, the entire system. But no, it's not going to be a massive undertaking the first 10 years where everything needs
Okay.
replaced.
Will there need to be some repairs for those leaking lines?
Absolutely.
What's your problem?
No, it's an age of infrastructure problem and a lack of reinvestment over decades.
Okay. So are the cost of repairing and replacing those water lines, is any of that included in the preliminary engineering report?
No, it is not. That's a much longer term project.
Any ballpark idea how much it might cost?
No, we have to work on triaging the system and just getting it back to functional, getting rid of the 150 water leaks you have currently.
Okay. So again, looking at the system alone projections, which I understand you're saying is not likely how it's going to play out, but you go from the 42 some dollars to the $71. You know, it looks like that would be a $30.56 increase in 3 years. Do I understand correctly from the customer notice that of that increase amount, only $3.48 on the bill per month for residential is attributed to the water system improvements that have been identified in the preliminary engineering report?
I don't remember it like that.
Okay. Well, let me pull out my source here. I can read this to you, or if you want, I can approach witness and show you the wording in the customer notice. Either way.
Either way, it's fine with me.
Okay. This is from page 1 of the order scheduling hearings and requiring customer notice. The second full paragraph, there's a sentence that said, based on Redbird's estimated cost for these improvements, due diligence costs, and the purchase price of the Lake Royale water utility system, the approximate annual revenue requirement associated with the water utility system capital expenditures is $68,692 or $3.48 per customer per month. Now, I'm not sure if I've interpreted that correctly, but that's where I got that 348 from.
Yeah, and the stipulations already changed those numbers.
Okay, and what is that number?
I don't know what the number is today.
Okay, so does that water system capital expenditures number reflect the cost of improvements identified in the preliminary engineering report?
I believe it does.
Okay, so if rates over 3 years are to go up $30.56, hypothetically, as identified in the customer notice, but only $3.48 of that is for water system improvements, then the remainder of that increase is really going to be cost allocations from Redbird down to the Lake Royale subdivision?
No,
Okay, where else would those costs come
this is
from?
all hypothetical. I mean, I have no idea.
You have no idea where the projection came from?
Yeah, those costs come from because we disagree with the way those are done.
Mhm. And yet, who provided that number for the customer notice?
Well, we disagree about the way the allocations are done. We disagree with every part of how that number is built.
Okay.
None of that is real for us.
Thank you. That's all my questions. I appreciate it.
Mr. Cox, I've been saying good morning, but we did start at 12 o'clock, so good afternoon again. I have a number of questions from commission staff and also from myself. And I'll preface my questions by saying that I recognize that some of the questions have been addressed by the stipulation, but the reason for the questions is that we the commission wants to have a better understanding of Redbird's position in its application and testimony, and then also the stipulation. And some of the questions that I'll be asking of you will be similar questions that I'll be asking the public staff as well. Okay. So starting with questions about capital structure and financing, and I will refer you to pages in your testimony. I'm not sure that it's necessary for you to flip to it, but I will give you the page in case you need it. But in your direct testimony on page 17, you state that the company has invested more than $416 million in systems through equity, and that you intend to pursue debt financing at, quoting, the appropriate time. Can you provide the commission with some additional information about when you anticipate that appropriate time will be?
Yeah, I mean, for example, commissioners, think about the Lake Royale system. So, Tessie has, shown their annual reports, have lost money for the last number of years. In fact, I think they lost $250,000 one year. So all, the rates haven't been changed in, I get over a decade, well over a decade. So none of these rates are, commensurate with even the cost of service. So we have to use all equity when we purchase these systems, do the improvements, come back to the commission at some future date after the improvements made after aggregation of a bunch of systems, get commensurate rates in place before we could get debt financing, because there's no cash flow to support any debt financing in the state with these loss-making systems.
And do you have any general estimate about when that time period will be when you would be seeking debt financing?
It would be after some future rate proceeding.
And then I had a similar question that your answer is probably going to be the same, but for the record, I'll ask it for you. Redbird says that ultimately the capital structure will be 50 to 60% equity and 40 to 50% debt. And can you, for that similar question, can you explain when that change from capital structure of debt and equity you anticipate might occur?
Yeah, absolutely the same. It's after rates, you have to have cash flow to support debt financing. So after future rates are done, those cash flows then be able to support future debt.
And this is a question from the commission staff, and they have asked that you provide some insight to the commission about the company's business plans and need for external financing, and to speak generally about business plans and external financing that you may be seeking.
Yeah, I mean, so we're, I guess a little bit about our company. So Central States Water Resources, our mission is to bring safe, reliable, and environmentally sustainable water resources to every community in the U.S. So North Carolina faces the same issue that states all across the country face. There are, hundreds, if not thousands, of small utilities that really lack the technical, managerial, and financial ability to run a utility. And kind of what we've seen, even with Tessie being a co-op, they got into the water and wastewater space. These are the day the mom and pop utilities kind of passed. So our plan is we're buying small troubled water and wastewater systems all over the country. We came to North Carolina because North Carolina is in the top 10 of having the most amount of compliance issues and the highest amount of fragmentation. So really our plan is to continue to buy utilities in the state as we have other applications before the commission today, bring those systems back into compliance, which it takes capital investment, do the reinvestment necessary, come before the commission to get commensurate rates, and then apply for debt financing after that. Before that, all the financing is done with equity because there is no cash flow to support any debt.
And then my next question from staff deals with capital infusions let me make sure I'm pronouncing this right. Science US Water, is that correct?
No, the technical group we're getting equity funding from is US Water Systems, LLC.
Okay. And so commission staff has asked, how long will the company's current plans and contracted acquisitions continue to require equity infusions from U.S. Water Systems LLC?
Is the question, Commissioner, how many years it will take?
Right, time period again, general time period.
I mean, depending on the pace of acquisitions, I imagine the next 3 to 4 years.
And can you speak to the nature of the capital that U.S. Water Systems LLC has access to? And the question is, for example, is it a committed pool with a life long enough to see through the investments, or are the investors able to withdraw it on demand? Can you speak generally to the nature of that capital?
No, Commissioner, we're backed by a New York private equity firm. I can tell you Central States, I'm the founder of the company. So Central States Water Resources, we're a kind of forever hold utility company. So there are no plans in our company to exit the utility business, sell assets. We don't sell utilities, all of that.
Then on page 5, lines 13 and 14 of your settlement testimony, you state, and I'm going to quote, funding from U.S. Water is approved and pulled down to CSWR 3 times per year, end quote. Can you explain these 3 funding events from U.S. Water to CSWR, including the timing of the funding and the minimum or maximum amounts to be provided?
So there are no minimum or maximum amounts in terms of what we can pull down. It all follows the business plan that we have in front of us. And the business plan all centers around identifying troubled utilities, identifying the costs it's going to do to bring these systems back in compliance, and what operational costs it take to run those utilities. The timing is really, it's set by Central States Water Resources, how often we want to come in and present. We give an annual budget for what we think the following year is going to be, and then just draw down on that.
So there's no time certain for those timing events?
No, we kind of make a decision internally as a company at Central States. We want to do that.
Okay. And then can you talk about whether there are any minimum or maximum caps on funding from CSWR to the CSWR utility affiliates?
No, there are no caps.
And so the next question is about the allocation methodology. And could you explain the Massachusetts allocation methodology that you mentioned on the updated explanation of corporate structure exhibit that you provided with your settlement testimony?
Here we go. Now you're going to make me do regulatory utility accounting. So, I'll give the layman, president version of that. Basically, it's the total customers. It's all the overhead costs divided by total customers, and as a function of rate base and expense is how I would characterize that. So if we have 200,000 households we serve across the entire country, and that 200,000 households has $500 million of rate base, it would be the allocation would be the subsection of the state that is customers and rate base.
And so would it be on a pro rata basis?
Pro rata, correct.
Okay.
And Commissioner, I believe that's one of the great benefits we offer, especially here in North Carolina, because it's a smaller market for us, is that we have this, organization that we've bought more small water and wastewater systems than any other entity in the last 20 years. And we have more experience turning them around, and we're bringing all the experience at a fraction of the cost because we're spreading those costs around such a large base.
And so can you elaborate on that and talk about economy of scale that will benefit North Carolina customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're getting the fractional amount of all that expertise passed down to every individual customer. A is one of the benefits of scale you get. B, think all these individual utilities, Tessie in particular, they can't attract the talent that they need to run these systems. In fact, that's been one of Tessie's big problems even recently, is they can't even keep qualified operators. So we have purchasing power to do that. And then when we do construction projects on a statewide basis, we're able to bid those out in larger packages because we're aggregating a bunch of smaller utility packages into a single construction package, which one attracts the higher tier of contractors, so you get better workmanship, and then 2, lower prices because it's more competitive.
And so your answer reminds me of a question that I had about the certified operator. And I know from the testimony that Redbird is not intending to retain the operator for the Tessie system, and you've already hired another certified operator. Can you explain the position about Redbird, about choosing different or selecting different operators to run systems and why you did it in this particular instance.
Well, we did it in this instance because Tessie was in a jam. They were losing all their professional operators. So they couldn't retain staff. So we were afraid that the system would lose the basic ability to provide service. So they came to us and said, we're in a desperate situation here. Can you please step in on a kind of a temporary operating agreement? And so that's what we did. That's why we stepped into the position we did.
And how long has the new operator been operating the system?
A couple months, I believe.
And have you seen any improvement in operations of the system since you have the new operator in place?
Oh, we've repaired a ton of water leaks already. I think there was 150 leaks or 155 when we walked in. I think we've knocked out, 20% of those, something like that. So we're moving very quickly.
Okay. Well, that's positive development, certainly.
Yes, Commissioner.
So going back to a question that I had just asked, we want additional clarification about U.S. water resources. Will it be at any risk of losing the capital commitments that it is using to fund capital infusions? Or is your answer that CSWR itself has the cash flows to fund these capital needs in North Carolina?
There's no risk of the cash flow of the equity not being there.
Okay, and can you elaborate about why there is no risk?
Yeah, I mean, because, we've got a large pool of capital that's available to us. I mean, I believe, Commissioner, we've already proven it. By the end of this year, we'll put $500 million in the ground, kind of across 12 states.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my favorite things about this job. We're taking Wall Street money and putting it on Main Street America.
And this, the next question deals with your due diligence cost that is addressed in the stipulation. And on page 26 of your direct testimony, and I recognize that the agreement that has been reached about due diligence costs is different from the information that's provided in your initial testimony. But you did state that you can never be exactly sure what capital investments will be required for repairs and upgrades until you have a chance to operate the systems you will require. And Public Staff Witness Hauser asserts that your due diligence costs are, as he describes it, significantly higher than those of previous water transfer applicants. And can you explain why the due diligence costs that are reflected in the stipulation of $40,801.23 would be, in this particular instance, considered to be prudent and reasonable?
I mean, Commissioner, the only way I can answer that is we've stipulated to that fact that's much less than our actual due diligence costs are. So, I believe, from our perspective, we're buying troubled utilities. I mean, let's take Tessie, for example, nationally. Tessie has violated the Clean Water Act over 5,000 times over the last 10 years across their entire national footprint. So these systems, and I believe that the co-op got into business for the right reasons. They had customers that they were serving electricity to. So I totally understand their intentions. Water and sewer is a different animal than electricity. And I don't just pick on Tessie. This is all these small, utilities across the country are facing very similar circumstances. So when we're buying systems that are nearly fully depreciated, they have a history of noncompliance, the amount of due diligence costs are higher than they would be if I was buying a municipality that, had been well maintained and upgraded over years and years. So you have to determine where the problems are. How are you going to maintain service? Because you think it's health and safety that's at risk. And it's one of the things that's frustrating for us as investor owned is I believe that these small communities are held to a lower standard than a large community is in terms of compliance history, service reliability, all those things. And we are as a company bringing these systems back into full compliance, not intermittent compliance, not intermittent reliability, full compliance. And to do that, we have to have a deeper dive on the engineering and even just the property rights and these things. The title work is terrible. I mean, everything just to convey the system takes more work than a standard utility.
And I think that this will give some advance notice to Public Staff Witness Hauser that I'll be asking the same question about due diligence costs. And then can you turn to page 31 of your direct testimony?
I'm there, Commissioner.
Okay. And you state on that page that changes to North Carolina General Statute, Section 62-111, enacted by the General Assembly during the last legislative session, now provide that the commission shall, quote, shall issue an order approving an application to acquire water and wastewater system assets if the proposed acquisition is in the public interest, will not adversely affect service of the public under any existing franchise, and the person acquiring said franchise has the technical, managerial, and financial capabilities necessary to provide public utility service to the public. And you proceed to also state that by limiting the focus of the commission's inquiry and acquisition cases, I believe that the General Assembly has signaled that extraneous issues, such as whether an acquisition adjustment should be approved, should be deferred to rate and other post-acquisition proceedings. So I will preface my question with, I understand in the stipulation that the Redbird and the public staff have agreed to not seek an acquisition adjustment in this proceeding. But can you provide some additional information or point to any language in the statute or elsewhere that that you would rely upon to support your position that the General Assembly didn't intend the commission to determine the rate base or potentially acquisition adjustments and transfer proceedings? We'd like to better understand positions of the parties about this new statute.
Yeah, so again, I'm not an attorney. From a layman's perspective, when I read that, and I'm quoting, I've got the statute right here in front of me, so I'm quoting, butcher this. It will not adversely affect service to the public under any existing franchise. That means we're not going to be worse service. We come in from my perspective. And the acquiring entity has the acquiring entity has the technical, managerial, financial capabilities to provide service. And the rest of those issues are extraneous and would have to be brought up and brought before the commission in some future hearing. And I think even the confusion you heard from the Property Owner Association today, the way that notice went out, where we were required to try and calculate standalone rates for an individual system that we don't believe we would ever do in some future proceeding, is a great example of how that confuses the issue of, hey, this is a failing utility that needs new ownership, needs new capital, and in this, obviously in this proceeding, are we able to meet those thresholds? That seems to me the plain reading the text.
Thank you. And I will be asking a similar question to Public Staff Witness Hauser, so he can be prepared to answer that question as well. And then my last questions are related to what you've been talking about generally about failing systems or troubled systems. And can you, and I recognize that the stipulation, you've agreed not to have an acquisition adjustment, but I'd like to have a better understanding of Redbird's position about what would constitute a troubled system or a failing system, so that we can have better understanding of at least your position of what those characteristics or definition might be.
So there was a number of questions there, Commissioner. I'm trying to answer those kind of in some order here. So what I do not like about how this system was viewed in particular is walking onto a site at any given moment is not a determination whether or not this system is failing or not. When you have declining net book value over decades, you have a history of noncompliance, years and years of noncompliance, customer complaints at hearings that say, hey, we can't get a leak fixed. It takes 6 months to a year to have them show up. These are all indicative of a utility that should not be in the business anymore. And I think, when we look at compliance history, one of the things that's frustrating for us as a utility, when there's a fecal coliform violation in a drinking water system or a lack of reporting, that is a potential human health risk. That is saying that this community could have been exposed to human pathogens or some type of pathogen in the water system. And that's, from our perspective, unacceptable. When you think about 150 water leaks sitting in the system unattended, those are all potential intrusions for, pathogens, bacteria, you name it, into a system. When you just look at the condition of this system, I've got a picture of the water tower in the front of my book here that I'm glad to pass out, that just gives you a picture of how dilapidated this thing is. I mean, it's about ready to structurally fail. It's covered in rust. The inside's not been maintained for decades. You've got lift stations that are undersized. They don't meet minimum code. And you just go on and on. You've got vegetation growing in sand filter beds, which shows that there's no maintenance. Those things are not functioning. I mean, just the pure desktop review of these systems shows that it's failing. The financial review of the annual report shows it's failing. So walking on a site and saying today nothing is failing, even though it's failed for years, doesn't seem to be an accurate representation of what constitutes a failing system.
Okay.
I think your other question was about the acquisition adjustment. I think this is one of those difficult things we face as an acquiring utility. So, for example, with the Tessie system, Tessie's lost money on this system for years now. So they have hundreds of thousands of dollars of losses. We obviously have a stipulation of what everything's going to come out at. From our perspective, these utility owners, in regards to Tessie or a mom and pop owner that are buying in other places in North Carolina, they are pulling either they've invested money they've not been able to recoup out of the systems. They've lost money. They want some consideration for that. Or with much of smaller owners, even though they're running a failing system, there's violations coming out the wazoo, they're still pulling money out of these systems. So, a regulator, any one of us can say your system's worth $0. Well, if you're an owner, I'm still pulling $50,000 out of the system or $15,000 out of the system, or I drive a company truck. There is residual economic value, and these owners need out of the business. It's obvious. So trying to negotiate to the lowest possible number, but also realizing that, hey, it is in the public interest to get a bad owner out, because these are human health and safety issues and reliability issues that matter a ton for a community. Those are the type of considerations we think warrant an acquisition adjustment.
Okay. And then the last question, talking about violations that you've been mentioning, is should the commission consider some violations to be more significant for determining a troubled system and some less significant? For example, a reporting violation. Should the commission view that as less significant for trying to determine whether a system is troubled?
Yeah, I've been asked this question before, Commissioner. I would say no. And here's why I say no. A lot of the reporting violations are a failure to report. And what that often tells us is they don't want to report on what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've seen, unfortunately, wastewater and water operators all over the country, they don't report because they know what's going on in the system at any individual moment. And those failures to report oftentimes recognize the fact that they think they would fail, and thus they're not reporting. And it's easier to get a slap on the wrist of a paper violation of not reporting and rectifying that in a month when you've turned around whatever failed components in the system than it is to show a failure on an ongoing basis.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cox, for answering those questions, because I do realize that they are outside of what is contained in the stipulation, but we wanted to have a more full understanding with this hearing of Redbird's position about some of these matters. So those are all the questions that I have. Commissioner Hughes?
Yeah, just a couple related questions. You've talked a lot about the importance to your strategy and sort of the power that you're going to be able to have when you own multiple systems, to have a uniform rate or a standard rate across all the systems. Is that been a strategy that you've been successful in other states where you're operating? Is that pretty much your kind of model?
Yes, we're the first water utility to get consolidated rates in Missouri, Missouri, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, all those states we've gotten consolidated rates.
Okay. And knowing in North Carolina that is something that will come up at a future date, do you have contingency plans for some of these systems if that does not get approved? You've talked about this not being a true rate because you're going to have consolidated rates, but if it doesn't get approved, do you have a strategy moving forward?
Absolutely. We've had to use standalone rates in numerous places, over the course of our history. So we've done both.
And in this particular situation, there's been a lot of focus on the capital costs and what impact that will have on rates. And it seems like you've also insinuated and others that the operation level is insufficient, the current operation level, and that's going to cost, that could possibly require increased costs just to have more reliable contract operators, to carry out more inspections, to increase the amount of repairs. just could you comment a little bit about your, your experience and your feelings in this particular situation? Is it, are you going to have to spend a lot more on operation to get it up to speed?
100%. I mean, you think right now the wastewater situation is a great example. You have mechanical components that aren't running. You have disinfection that's not being added. So right now the system is not even incurring the normal operating costs that it would if it was being properly operated just to its design standards. And that's typical across the entire country. These systems are not, it's, duct tape and baling wire and as few personal hours as they can get out there and as few equipment repairs as they think they can get away with. I'm not saying that on testing in particular, I'm saying that in general, our experience.
And is that type of estimate in what your public noticed with the cost? Is that a mixture of both capital and operating cost increase?
I believe it is.
That's it. No, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Cox, I'm going to ask if you can help me reconcile a couple of different things I heard here. When we talked earlier, you indicated Redbird did not have plans to replace the water distribution system in the next 10 years. Is that correct?
No, I said that's a longer term project. That's something that would take 10 years or longer.
Okay.
Typically, these water systems are 30-year lifespans, and even after 10 years past their depreciated life, they last. So that's a targeted investment strategy.
Do you recall customer testimony indicating the customers thought that the pipes in the ground are 50 years old?
Yes.
Okay. So, and when you were asked by Commissioner Kimwright about what is a troubled or failing system, and you indicate this is a dilapidated and failing system. You talked about identifying 150 leaks so far. Does that suggest that there's a fair chance this, once you do a complete assessment, this system will need replacement?
So I think, as water utilities, you don't wholesale replace all the pipes. You go to the areas you have the most problems, and then you start working on the system as a whole. So will there be targeted replacements? Absolutely. And really you do that to lower operating costs. It's much more expensive to go repair a water main 10 times from a rate making perspective than it is to replace some section of water main. So that's what we're talking about in terms of targeted replacements.
Right.
Over the next 30 years, all the pipe needs replaced. And that's a long-term, prospect that all these small water utilities face across the state.
Any idea how much will need replacement in the next, say, 5 years?
No, I don't know the
Okay.
answer to that.
That's going to depend on your more complete engineering assessment.
Right, and that also comes from operating the system. You start
Okay.
to see where your problem areas are. We don't believe the books and records probably accurately reflect the repairs where they've been done, what's happening. So we have to get a feel for that, just running it.
Sure. And so you had earlier talked about a more complete assessment might be done in 3 months, give or take. Will that identify how much of the water lines need replacement?
No, that's referring to the water storage tank, doing a booster pump, those type of repairs and just the basic service is what I'm
Okay.
referring to there. It's not talking about
Right.
water line replacement.
So at least in the short term, it'll just be a case of on the water lines themselves that are leaking, you'll just repair the leaks one by one.
Or if we have an area where there's a ton of leaks, then we look at replacement rather than fixing a ton of leaks in some small area.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Mr. Cox, just a couple of questions. You were asked questions about the contents of the customer notice that was issued in this case. You recall those questions?
Yes.
Do you know if the public staff developed the rate projections and the gallons of water estimate that were included in that customer notice?
I believe they did.
How do you or can you distinguish, you've referred to both operationally and financially troubled systems. How do you distinguish, what are the distinguishing characteristics in those two different dimensions?
Well, they oftentimes go hand in hand. But operationally challenged means they don't have the qualified personnel or the technical managerial ability to run the utility. They don't actually understand how the components work together, how they're providing service. On the financial side, it often means they're losing money, they lack access to capital markets, so they get into the death spiral of non-compliance and the cutoff from capital markets. They cannot make improvements to rectify the problems they have inside the system.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you. I did already, Shu. I'll move the admission of the exhibits that were attached to the pre-filed direct testimony, the Thomas rebuttal testimony, and the supplemental testimony at this time.
Okay.
Commissioner Kimmerer.
Seeing no objection, your motion is allowed. And Mr. Higgins, I think you have some additional motions for the testimony and including the rebuttal testimony of Ms. O'Reilly, if you'd like to make
Yes.
that motion now.
Thank you.
Okay.
I would also move the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Caitlin O'Reilly into evidence now, which I believe had no exhibits.
Okay. Seeing no objection, your motion is allowed, and part of the rebuttal testimony I will note is confidential.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Cox, no further questions from the commission. Thank you for your testimony, and you may be excused.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay.
The public staff calls Lynn Fiesel and Evan Hauser.
Good afternoon, Ms. Fiesel and Mr. Hauser. Can you place your left hand on the Bibles and raise your right hands? And do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to begin with Ms. Fiesel. Please state your name, business address, and your current position for the record.
My name is Lynn Fiesel. Business address is 430 North Salisbury Street, Raleigh, North Carolina. My title is the Public Utility Regulatory Analyst Supervisor.
On September 19th, 2023, did you prepare and cause to be filed in these dockets testimony consisting of 8 pages, Appendix A, and 4 exhibits?
Yes,
And 2 of your exhibits contain confidential information, is that correct?
correct.
Do you have any corrections to that testimony?
No, I don't.
If you were asked the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes,
All right, I move that the pre-filed testimony of Ms. Fiesel be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand, and that her exhibits be identified as they were marked when they were filed.
And Ms. Yost, my notes show 3 exhibits. Can we just clarify to make sure that it's 4 rather than 3 exhibits?
It is in fact 4. The numbering is a little strange. So we had Fiesel Exhibit 1, Arabic number 1, and then we have Fiesel Exhibits 1, 2, and 3 with Roman numerals.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. So Ms. Fiesel's direct testimony filed on September 19th, 2023, consisting of 8 pages, will be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand. And the appendix, along with 1 appendix, the 4 exhibits attached to Ms. Fiesel's direct testimony will be marked for identification purposes as pre-filed. And I will note that portions of the direct testimony are marked confidential.
All right, Mr. Hauser, could you please state your name, business address, and current position for the record?
Sure. I'm Evan Hauser. My business address is 430 North Salisbury Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, and my position is public utilities engineer for the public staff, water, sewer, and telephone division.
On September 19th, 2023, did you prepare and cause to be filed in these dockets testimony consisting of 34 pages and an Appendix A?
Yes.
And on September 26th, 2023, did you prepare and cause to be filed in these dockets corrected testimony, which also consisted of 34 pages and Appendix A?
Yes.
Do you have any additional corrections to your testimony?
No.
If you were asked the same questions today, would your answers be the same as in your corrected testimony?
Yes.
I move that Mr. Hauser's corrected testimony be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Seeing no objection, The direct testimony of Mr. Hauser filed on September 19th, 2023, consisting of 34 pages and one appendix, and also the corrected direct testimony filed on September 26th of 2023, consisting of 34 pages and one appendix, will be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. Now for the panel of Mr. Fiesel or Ms. Fiesel and Mr. Hauser. On October 23rd, 2023, did you prepare and cause to be filed in these dockets joint settlement testimony, which consisted of 7 pages and 2 exhibits?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you have any corrections to that testimony?
No.
If you were asked the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
I move that the joint settlement testimony of Ms. Fiesel and Mr. Hauser be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand, and that their exhibits be identified as marked when they were filed.
Okay. Seeing no objection, the joint settlement testimony filed on October 23, 2023, consisting of 7 pages, will be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand. The 2 exhibits attached to the settlement testimony will be marked for identification purposes as pre-filed.
Thank you. The panel is available for questions from the POA and Tessie and the commission.
No questions.
Okay, seeing no questions from the parties, I do have a few questions for both of you, beginning with Ms. Fiesel. This relates to the stipulation about the net book value. And the public, and I recognize that that there is a stipulation between the public staff and Redbird about what the net book value number is to be. The public staff had initially calculated the rate base to be $167,306, and the stipulation it is higher than the initial calculation. So the stipulation, the net book value is $186,541. Can you explain the difference between those two numbers and how you arrived at the approximately $186,000 amount?
Yes. Previously, when we filed the original testimony, I take the recommendation from Yes. So when we filed the original testimony, I come in with the 167 number net book value. That is because I take the recommendation of witness Hauser. I start with what is proved from the last rate case and add in planned additions with invoice supporting documentation. And I also removed some plans that are suggested by witness Hauser that should be removed because they were not in service. Now, in the settlement testimony, the number is higher because I add in additional $26,701 for what has been removed in my original testimony for settlement purpose.
And the approximately $26,000 that had been removed, was that for plant and service? Is that where that number came from?
Yes.
Okay, so you added it back into the
Yes.
net book value.
Mhm.
And then on Public Staff Settlement Exhibit 1, Schedule 2-1, and this would be on lines 13, 20, 21, and 23. And I'll wait till you get there.
Which exhibit?
It is Exhibit 1,
Mm.
Schedule 2-1, and this is, excuse me, Settlement Exhibit 1.
Okay.
Okay. And there is the lines 13, 20, 21, and 23 show some red lettering. Can you explain what the significance of the red lettering is?
There is no special difference between what is marked as red or black. It's maybe just as when I do my calculation, I mark something as if there is any adjustment, but no, there is no difference.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And then this is, again, the same exhibit. It's Settlement Exhibit 1, Schedule 2-1, and this would be lines 22 and 23. And they provide the total plant additions since the water rate case proceeding and the sewer CPCN proceeding. And then if you can look to column C, that provides the year placed in service. And it states various.
Yeah.
Okay. And then column E, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go through the entire question first.
Mm.
Column E provides the asset life that is blank.
Mhm.
And then column F provides the number of years in service, and it states various.
Yeah.
So with all of that information, can you explain the assumptions used to calculate the amount of annual depreciation expense and accumulated depreciation listed in the columns G and H for lines 22 and 23?
Yes. So the reason why I listed various for the life and the years in service is because the total plant additions for both water and sewer, it includes multiple different types of plants. And I have the details upon the document to support the life for each type of plant, which are not the same for every single one. So that's why I cannot list the exact life in this summary exhibit. But I can file the supporting document if the commission wants to support the numbers. And the way I calculate the annual depreciation and the cumulative depreciation is the same as how I calculated for the prior plants, which were approved in the last 3 cases. I use half-year convention method to calculate the cumulative depreciation.
Thank you for that explanation. And we would request the supporting documentation filed as a late filed exhibit.
Okay, can do that.
That's all the questions that I have for you, Ms. Fiesel. Commissioner Hughes may have some questions, but I'm going to move on to Mr. Hauser. And some of the questions I'll be asking, I think you've probably been given a preview of what I may be asking. But I'm going to start with the last questions that I had for Mr. Cox about what is a failed or failing and troubled water or wastewater system. And I'd like to hear from the public staff what the public staff views, what characteristics or what the public staff would view as a troubled or failing system that would be in the context of considerations for acquisition adjustments.
As far as I would look for criteria such as failing to maintain compliance. Excuse me, sorry if you can't hear me. I would look for things like failing to be able to maintain compliance with their environmental standards. That would be an indicator. And that would be routine, regular issues with probably the same type of analytes or contaminants or things like that. Excuse me, I'm being general.
Mm-hmm.
I would look to compliance history as an indicator.
And I asked Mr. Cox about, are there some compliance violations that would be more significant than others? For example, a reporting violation. How would the public staff view a reporting violation?
I personally would view health-based violations as more significant than reporting and monitoring violations. Well, no non-compliance is recommended or good. Certainly the violations that tie to health issues and contaminants that are known should be treated, I think, should be looked at more than things that are based on failure to collect samples, failure to, those are failures to maintain compliance, but they're not necessarily indicative of a health issue unless, excuse me, I'd be speculating. In cases where there's not other examples of continuing compliance issues with that particular analyte, for example, repeated E. coli CLs, and then a monitoring violation, you could maybe consider that different than a monitoring violation, which was for something that there have been no previous issues with.
And does the public staff look to any firm definitions or kind of like black letter type of definitions, for example, to determine what a troubled system is? For example, does the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, did they have a definition for a troubled or failing system? And if so, do you know what that definition is?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And then I had a couple of questions that I did not ask Mr. Cox about, but this relates to the bond. And I recognize that this is also an issue that has been addressed in the stipulation. But the issue about what the public staff's recommendation for the bond was in dispute before the stipulation. And can you talk about whether what position the public staff has about increasing increasing the amount of bonds for its recommendation in the past few years? Because my understanding is the public staff has been requesting higher bonds in the past several years than it previously did.
So I can't speak strongly for our change in bond recommendations over time. I can speak to the recommendation in this case.
Okay, yes, please explain the basis for this recommendation.
So I believe the minimum now is $25,000 for each water and sewer utility. And in this case, there's a large number of water customers and there's potentially a large amount of capital investment proposed for the system. So I think those could both be contributing factors to a requested increased bond amount, and that is also what is agreed upon in the stipulation agreement.
Okay. And then the question about the due diligence costs portion of the stipulation. And I believe that the public staff had originally recommended $10,000 for due diligence costs, and Mr. Cox has testified that due diligence is for these smaller mom and pop systems can be greater or higher than some other systems that would be transferred. And can you talk about the reasonableness of the almost $41,000 due diligence costs in the stipulation?
Yes. So the due diligence costs that were included in the stipulation are tied to engineering related costs, which can can be evaluated. I'm going to back up. They're tied to engineering costs, which could result in improvements to the water and wastewater system. And so the stipulation also ties them to seeking recovery when there are, it ties the due diligence amounts to improvements in the water and wastewater system.
Okay. And then, so this relates to a question about information about cost, but a quantity of 2,300 gallons per month of water usage was used to calculate the average monthly bill for a residential water customer in the commission's scheduling order that we've heard some testimony about from Mr. Cox today. The scheduling order that was issued on July 11th of 2023. And how was the 2,300 gallons per month of water usage calculated for the average residential customer for purposes of that scheduling order?
So I believe that was calculated based on response to a billing DR. I don't know the exact, off the top of my head, the exact way that was calculated, but I can look into it, and if you're okay with it, provide you an additional document supporting that amount or explaining how it was arrived at.
Yes, we would request that explanation as a late filed exhibit, since there has been some concern from Redbird about that calculation. So that's all the questions that I have. Commissioner Hughes?
Yeah, yes. Both you and Mr. Cox talked about water quality violations being an indicator of some type of problem with the system. What weight does the public staff put for service quality complaints that came in? Mr. Cox mentioned the complaints at the public hearing and the complaints that they've received and that have been filed into the record. How does that play into a view about a system's ability to continue?
Ability to continue.
Just, an ability to be a viable system when there's a history of complaints and there's just a large number of complaints, even if the violations maybe aren't as serious as other systems, but the actual customers are frankly unhappy.
I believe that the customer concern should be considered. I do think that Redbird and Tessie both filed reports addressing the customer complaints at the hearing. I think they did a reasonable job addressing them. It does sound like Redbird may, whether or not this will actually come to fruition, may have some plans to address the customer concern in the future.
Okay, no further questions. Thanks.
Okay, questions on commission questions?
Just a couple. Ms. Fiesel, I believe Commissioner Kemmeray asked you about the assumptions underlying some of the references to or various in your settlement exhibit 1, schedule 2-1.
Yeah,
Would those assumptions be in the native version of that exhibit?
yes,
And is it your understanding that that is as a routine matter filed or submitted to the commission?
yes.
Okay. And now for Mr. Hauser, you were asked about the calculations in the customer notice and the inclusion of 2,300 gallons per month as the average usage. Do you recall that information came from the company's response to public staff data request 2?
I'm not sure the specific number, but yes, it was in response to a data request.
Okay, so that was based on information provided by the company. It wasn't just a number that the commission or the public staff came up with on it. So
That's my understanding.
Okay. Just let me check my notes for a moment, please. Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you.
No questions from me.
Okay, seeing no questions, Ms. Yost, do you have any motions you would like to make for these witnesses?
I do. Thank you. I move the admission of public staff Fiesel exhibits Arabic number 1 and Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3, and public staff settlement exhibits 1 and 2.
Seeing no objection, your motion is allowed.
Thank you.
And with that, Ms. Fiesel and Mr. Hauser, you may be excused.
Thank you.
At this time, the public staff calls John Hinton.
Good afternoon, Mr. Hinton.
Good afternoon.
Will you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand? And do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Could you please state your name, business address, and current position for the record?
My name is John Robert Hinton. My business address is 430 North Salisbury Street, Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm the Director of the Economic Research Division for the Public Staff.
On September 19th, 2023, did you prepare and cause to be filed in these dockets testimony that consisted of 5 pages, an Appendix A, and 1 exhibit?
Yes.
Do you have any corrections to that testimony?
No, I do not.
If you were asked the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
I request that Mr. Hinton's pre-filed testimony be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand, and that his exhibit be identified as marked when filed.
And Ms. Yost, I was looking at something else. Was there an appendix that was attached to Mr. Hinton's direct testimony?
Yes, it's his qualifications.
Okay. It said the direct testimony of Mr. Hinton filed on September 19th of 2023, consisting of 5 pages and 1 exhibit, shall be copied into the record as if given orally from stand. The one exhibit shall be pre-filed for identification purposes.
Thank you. Mr. Hinton is available for questions from the POA, Tessie, and the commission.
No questions.
Mr. Hinton, it looks like you're not going to get many questions, but I do have one question for you. In your testimony, you spoke to the public staff's concerns about Redbird's ongoing cash needs. Can you explain how the terms of the stipulation will give you confidence that Redbird will have the necessary capital going forward until its operations are self-sustaining?
I can't say the stipulation does that much, other than the fact they agreed to meet with us on an annual basis. And we'll monitor the company as we will be doing on an ongoing basis. The item that I'm most concerned about is having sufficient capital to make the capital improvements that Mr. Cox spoke of and identified in our testimonies. So the stipulation doesn't give me that much other than that particular avenue. My confidence about the ongoing capital that will be available to the company is largely based on the testimony of Mr. Cox and his pre-filed testimony and the other items addressed in my testimony, which largely were the product of a lot of research with the Missouri Public Utilities Commission out there, dealing with the analyst out there who is very familiar with the operations of Central States water resources. He explained to me the kind of the items identified in Mr. Cox's supplemental testimony, where the funds arrange for private capital science management as part of that process, and the U.S. Water LLC and smaller systems make requests of the fund, and they provide funding for the company. I am reasonably comfortable that the company will be able to acquire additional capital to make the capital investments. I say that in the concept that, yeah, I would like to see some statements like financial statements that Duke Energy has, who has a fair amount of common equity and the ability to raise capital relatively painlessly. This is a company that depends on private equity. But again, my research has indicated there's no reason to think this company cannot do as Mr. Cox testified to. Is there any risk? Yes, but it's so small, it's within the realm of reasonableness to accept Mr. Cox's commitment to provide capital on an ongoing basis to Redbird operations in North Carolina. So that is why I believe they're financially viable. Those concerns have been abated. To say they've been completely removed, no, but that's thinking like in a perfect world. The water utilities in North Carolina, especially the small water utilities, they do struggle, as we all are familiar with. That death spiral that Mr. Cox spoke of, I think, is real. But this company has not been in for rate case. It needs to get some capital infusion and needs to get rate recovery. And I believe that this entity that Mr. Cox is chairman of will provide such capital and improvement in the conditions and water service in North Carolina.
And just to sum up your testimony, so my understanding is that the public staff's concerns about Redbird have been sufficiently answered or resolved so that you are comfortable recommending approval of this application. Is that correct?
Yes, I am. I mean, again, I say they need private equity infusions. Their consolidated financial statements demonstrate they've needed that, but I believe they'll continue to receive capital infusions to provide adequate service going forward. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hinton. No further questions from the commission.
Just one question. So you were asked about the benefit of the settlement, the stipulation, to your concerns about Redbird's ability to finance their acquisitions. Would you agree that prior to the filing of the settlement testimony, the public staff had some questions or points of uncertainty about the corporate structure and how funding flowed through that structure?
Yes, there was there was much concern about that. Again, it was abated to me from my research with the Missouri Commission, but I can testify to the commission that the public staff had its concerns, and I believe we did our due diligence.
And do you believe that the settlement testimony and the exhibit that was attached to Mr. Cox's settlement testimony provides a great deal of clarity about the corporate structure and how the financing flows through it?
Very much so. The pre-file testimony had left us with some questions unanswered. The data request came in, and but I think the supplemental testimony that you speak of Mr. Cox did provide a lot of clarity and gives us an additional level of comfort.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Just a couple questions, Mr. Hinton. You're aware that in the context of Tessie, that Tessie's been losing money for years, operating at a loss?
Yes,
And am I right that last year they lost $250,000?
I'll accept that subject to check.
Subject to check. Fair enough. And would you agree that an enterprise with that kind of balance sheet is not a candidate for debt financing at this point, and that equity is the only possible way that Redbird could hope to acquire this system?
I'll agree to that. I mean, other than some other entity with a combination of debt and equity could do it, but not Tessie.
And in fact, your research has disclosed that in other jurisdictions where where positive cash flow has been achieved, Redbird has been actually has gotten debt financing through CoBank, hasn't it?
Correct. That there are at least 3 different loans through CoBank that have occurred. So the company is moving, it's doing as Mr. Cox has identified. It's the startup company, it has to be 100% equity, but as they make capital investments in the utility business and capital cost recovery takes place, they can earn enough returns to, I think, qualify for debt. And that's how it was explained to me with the Missouri operations by the analyst out with the commission.
Thank you, sir. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, Ms. Yost, any motions?
Yes, I would move admission of public staff Hinton Exhibit 1.
Seeing no objection, your motion is allowed. And Mr. Hinton, thank you for your testimony. You may be excused. So I think that brings us to the end of the witnesses who are testifying. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And before we adjourn the hearing, are there any additional matters that need to be addressed by the attorneys?
I don't believe
I'm not aware of any.
Okay. There is one matter that I will address. It's regard to proposed orders. And we typically have proposed orders due 30 days after preparation and delivery of the transcript. But in this case, we have a fairly aggressive time schedule for getting the order issued. So the proposed orders will be due sooner than what we typically allow. So proposed orders will be due on November the 22nd of 2023. And I want to advise the attorneys that we will not be allowing extensions of time for the proposed orders. With that, is there anything else?
No?
No.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone and the witnesses for their testimony. Appreciate all of the information that was provided to the commission, and the hearing is adjourned. The hearing has been reconvened. I had adjourned it, but we're reconvening it. It has been brought to my attention that the stipulation among the parties has not been admitted into evidence. So we need to have a motion in regard to the stipulation.
Commissioner Kimmerite, I would move the admission of the settlement agreement stipulation filed with the commission yesterday, October 23rd, into the record in these dockets.
Okay. Seeing no objection, your motion is allowed. And with that, we will adjourn the hearing again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.